Thank you for coming to the Amber Shows. Please, once I finish my video, I would really appreciate you giving me a thumbs up. Please share my videos and also leave a comment. And if there's anything you want me to talk about, let me know and I'll do it. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so I'm going to answer some questions because on Sunday, it's a peaceful day. I'm going to make it not too long because I know that you have things to do and you want to relax. But on every Sunday, I'm going to talk about our story, our history. I'm going to start from the beginning when we were kings and queens and bring us all the way up to now. So, and give us information because a lot of us are not completely informed. I know we know about slavery. We know that we were slaves. We know that we were stolen from our villages and our continent. We know that we were on ships and beaten and raped and hung, and we know we had to pick cotton. But a lot of times we don't know the history behind that. And I think we need to just learn more about ourselves, so that we can begin to love one another. Our ancestors went through so much because they had no other choice. We have a choice now, and we must begin to love each other and stop hating on each other. All right, so one of my questions is, how did most colonial slaves spend their free time on Sundays? Well, a lot of them didn't have free time. The reason they didn't have free time is because they were slaves. So you had to work whenever you were told to work. That's the whole thing. So if you had a little free time, then a lot of time they tended a garden. Now the slaves who worked in what was called the big house is what the mansion where the family lived and the master's family lived. And so you had to cook dinner every day. You had to cook dinner, you had to work, you had to wash dishes, you had to clean the house, you had to get things prepared for them for Monday. So, they hardly ever had time off. Where did most slaves work? In the southern colonies. Most slaves usually worked, the most was Virginia and Maryland. They had the most slaves. Virginia had actually the most slaves. Slaves mainly worked on the plantation everywhere, some working, like I said, in the big house, but mostly they were just told to go and do what they needed to do, and that was it, where to work and how to work and get it done. Now, if they didn't work hard enough or fast enough, they were whipped. Children also worked on the plantation, and they also got whipped. Now, southern colonies had the most slaves because they were cash crops. That's what the cash crops were. So slaves were needed in the South to work on plantations and to pick cotton. That's what they had. So Georgia had the most oppressive conditions for slaves. The southern states of South Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia had the most slaves due to the fact they had the most farmland that was in need of tending, which slavery provided that for them. Now, New Jersey actually had slaves, but you could either pay in New Jersey to be free, or you were already born to free parents, so that way you didn't have to pay because your parents had already paid. Now, the western part of Virginia, they left Virginia during the Civil War to become a free state, and it's now called West Virginia. The remaining part of Virginia, is Virginia now, sided with the Confederates to keep slavery. Now, Georgia was a free state, a free slave state, a slave-free state, when it was originally founded in 1750. And then once the Africans came over, that's when they got into slavery. Now, Rhode Island had slaves, and the state had major players in Rhode Island in the transportation and the financing of the slave trade. A lot of money was made on us. Now, when the colonists first settled in what is now called Delaware, most of them came as poor, indentured people who were just indentured slaves. They were mostly English. Now, of course, later on, once the Africans were brought to this continent, then they kicked out, the white folks kicked out their indentured white old poor slaves and knew that they wouldn't have to pay them at all. They got us as slaves, and we worked free labor. in the early 1800s, the majority of the African population in Delaware were free, though there was no official legislation that actually declared them free. So if someone ran up on you and wanted to make you a slave, they actually could. Some say children as young as 2 years old were forced to perform labor duties, and some were put in areas to work in what's called the antebellum South. They had to learn to work routines. So the little kids had to learn about, discipline, how they have to act when they're on the plantation and picking cotton. They had to learn about what their punishment would be if they didn't do what they were told. So these are all the things that actually happen to us as human beings. Now, Americans sent free slaves to the northern states like New York and Maine. So on a typical plantation, slaves worked 10 or more hours a day, 6 days a week, with sometimes Sundays off or partly off. And during planting season and harvesting season, slaves were required to stay in the fields 15 to 16 hours a day. Little tidbit I wanted to talk about. All the black and brown people, you originated from slavery. You did. Because you speak Spanish and you say you're Puerto Rican, or you say you're Dominican, or you say you're Haitian, or you say you're Jamaican, we all came from Africa. Many of us who could not sustain the trip on the ships were dropped off at the different islands where plantations were there and they were suitable. I lived in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands for a few years. I saw plantations and with slaves on them, but I saw where they lived. Like if you go down south and you go into, you see all those big homes, all the big acres the people have. Those were slave plantations at the time. So we were dropped off at different islands because, like in St. Croix, they had banana trees and all types of stuff you had to do. They had big, huge plantations. And because the people that were there, the settlers that went to those islands who took them over, spoke different languages like Jamaica and Haiti, French, Dominican Spanish, Puerto Rican Spanish. So we were just dropped off at different ports. You're the same Africans, you just speak a different language, and that is it. You are Africans as well. And they tried to separate us and tell us that Jamaicans and Haitians and Dominicans and Puerto Ricans are different. That's a race. That's not a race. So you're either black or you're white, or unless you're Chinese, you're Asian. So we have gone through a lot. We have been tried to be separated by our skin color. They made us hate one another because the lighter skinned people were treated better, were probably given jobs in the big house, got to drive the cars, where darker people had to work harder. So they made us hate one another. All this, and we've carried all of this to us now in the 21st century, where we're still hating one another, we're still doing bad things to one another, we're still jealous of one another, we're still thinking one is better than the other because you may have more money or whatever, instead of bringing up everybody around you and keeping your tribe well. So this is important that we begin to go back. And I'm going to start from the beginning, showing we were the original mathematicians. We were the original builders and architects. We built the pyramids. Greeks took all of everything that we did and made themselves the fathers of mathematicians, and they were not. They burnt all of our history. Our history was burnt and kept from us, and then we weren't able to even travel to find. To this day, we can't go back to Africa and find a cousin, a sister, anybody. We can't go back and find our relatives, cousins, aunties, uncles, great aunties, uncles, things like that. We can't, because we don't know who they are, because they took us and never told us who our families were and separated us. Everybody else can go back to their country in Europe and find a relative there, except us. Our language was stripped from us. Our original religion was stripped from us. And here we are today, killing each other and hating each other in the 21st century. Our ancestors must be rolling over in their graves. We've got to do better. So I think if we know who we are and know more than just the little minimum things that we know about what we were doing when we were in Africa in the beginning, I think we'll begin to learn to love ourselves more and get better. You guys have a wonderful day. Thank you for coming to the Amber Shows. Please leave comments for me. Also hit that thumbs up button and share my videos. Have a wonderful day.